Hello and welcome to an addendum for the Bretonnian army list discussion. I've done this as a separate video because we actually got to an hour 50, or I think it was actually 2 hours 20 recording time on the original list. So I thought rather than having it all as one big condensed horrible file, I'd split it out a little bit so people could sort of segment what they actually wanted to listen to. Now, we're going to be going over both of the Outcast and Errantry Crusade lists today, and I'm going to be actually doing them in reverse order. In the book, it's the Outcast list first, but because the Errantry Crusade actually doesn't feature that many new units, actually no new units, I'm going to do that first and then do the bit of talk of characters and new magic items, and then go on to the Outcast list, which has got a host of new units. So in the Kingdom of Bretonnia Errantry Crusade, the difference between a normal army composition and the Errantry Crusade composition is that you have 1+ paladins as a base, whereas there wasn't a minimal limit on that in the main list. That obviously can be a battle standard bearer for free. So I think that's where they're giving a nod to sort of the 6th to 8th edition book, where you had to have a battle standard bearer. And it's free, right? I pretty much always take that anyway. And some of the magic banners are actually really good. And if not, it's a single extra point of combat res in whatever unit that paladin goes in, just for being a standard bearer, in addition to the unit standard bearer. So there's no real massive downside there. And next, you've got to have at least 33% core choices. And that's slightly different to the main list in that it's 25% normal. The unit of knights that you are forced to take in that core has got to be a unit of knights errant, and that's 1+ units of knights errant per 1,000 rather than just 1+, I believe it is in the main Bretonnians list. You've got 0 to 1 unit of battle pilgrims can be taken as core. And then Knights of the Realm on foot, Squires and Mounted Knights of the Realm make up the rest of your core. So you've got sort of this Knights Errant focus versus the Knights of the Realm. Now, we talked in the main Bretonnian guide about the differences on that, but actually I don't think it's going to do you that much harm just from base comparison when you're fighting opponents of weapon skill 4 and above, because you're going to want to try and get that charge. Yes, you're going to miss out on the counter charge, but with the Bretonnians' finest war horses rule, as well as some other things in here, you are going to get that charge much more often. So I think the downsides of those Knights Errant are mitigated a little bit. The only thing that I would say there is you're going to get much more impetuous into your army. So you better like set up your control of your army a bit more so that when you actually do have to roll for impetuous, it doesn't catch you out as often on that you're going to sometimes charge when you don't want to. The 0 to 1 battle pilgrims is poor. I suppose they are quite poor. They're peasants after all. But as we went over in the main Bretonnian guide, I'm actually much more in favour of the men-at-arms and having a sergeant-at-arms, etc., rather than having a double points value cost of battle pilgrims. It is a very fluffy unit though, and the Grail Relique looks amazing, so it's definitely worthwhile having one unit just to give that character to your army. And it is an Errantry Crusade after all, so they're going off and doing impetuous knight things and being venerated by the battle pilgrims in return. You then get obviously the Knights of the Realm on foot, Squires and Mounted Knights of the Realm, and that's sort of a switch around with the Squires going from special to core. It's definitely not a negative on that. The 2 points a model more expensive than Peasant Archers, and can fill up that core choice for you if you're struggling to get to the 33%. They come then with the ability to have, or they've got Vanguard already and can gain Scout, and I think it's definitely useful when you might be filling up your deployment zone and you don't want to sort of leave your Squires right at the back, because then wasting the extra 2 points that you're paying for them. You might as well have them scouting forwards, out of the way of your knights because they're scouting, or at least deployed within the wedges of your lances, that you can then vanguard them and then move them first out of the way of your knights as they're getting around. So I think it's a nice little interplay built into that force composition of the army, that it allows you to move those squires out of the way. In special, up to 50% of your points value can be spent here. That's men-at-arms, peasant bowmen, battle pilgrims, questing, and Pegasus. Men-at-arms, I actually think for what they are, would actually do quite nicely in the, in this list. They do. I love them in every list, so you might hear that and get sick of me saying it, but I do really like men-at-arms in any list. Peasant bowmen, I would not be wasting special choices on this. Battle pilgrims, I'd take them as that core if you're taking them, because there's going to be no upper limit to that. And questing knights versus Pegasus knights, we had this discussion in the main video. Pegasus knights in pretty much any army are absolute murderers. Just the mobility of them being able to fly over terrain and get flanking charges while in lance formation, I think is absolutely brutal. Playing off against that questing knights, they are amazing models. I don't think... I think with a full distance charge, them striking simultaneously with initiative 4s is definitely a downside, right? The fact that they're strength 6 all the time with those great weapons means it might be useful having some in there, because having that weapon skill 5, the strength 6, it's something that you can sort of throw into a giant or bigger unit and hopefully whittle it down over a bit longer, though I wouldn't be surprised if that lance got blunted fairly quickly. I wouldn't even be so adverse to having just 5 questing knights in a line. That was actually done quite a lot in 6th, I believe, or at least when I saw armies, you'd put them in a line instead of in the lance anyway. So I wouldn't see that as too much of a downside with a small unit of questing knights. Rares, you've got up to 33% of your army. Grail Knights, Mounted Yeomen, and 0 to 1 Field Trebuchet. Now, it's a bit... How many Grail Knights you want is going to tie into your special rules here. So we'll sort of leave how much of that you want to put in there. Yeomen, I still think that 1 unit of Mounted Yeomen is worth it. If you have 1 unit of Mounted Yeomen, it's about 100 points. So that's still going to leave about 500 points worth. And if you put in all that into 1 unit of Grail Knights, I think actually you've probably overinvested in that unit of Grail Knights. So we'll go on to the special rules of the army. You've got the Crusading Knights with an Errantry army. The following characters and units gain Crusader's Zeal, and the following characters or units have the Knight's Vow, can replace it with the Crusader's Vow. God, why can I not get it out at the moment? Basically, it's every unit of knights as well as the characters except for your Duke. So that's your 0 to 1 Duke isn't actually going to gain the Crusader's Zeal special rule, of which that is a unit with a special rule increases its maximum possible charge range by 1 inch. And when it makes a charge roll, apply a +1 modifier to the result. You also gain the Impetuous special rule. Again, this is tying into all of the... it's tied into everything in your army just being less controllable because of the absolute zeal of your army. What that means is the only reliable unit in your army is going to be the Duke, and that's if they're on their own. So actually a Duke on Hippogriff is starting to look more worthwhile. The Crusader's Vow is a chivalrous vow. In addition, a model with this does not have to make panic for friendly units of peasantry destroyed within 6 as per, cannot be joined by a character with the peasantry special rule, and cannot join a peasantry special rule. You also gain, through taking the Crusader's Vow, the Veteran special rule. And Veteran is very good. It means that you can re-roll any leadership tests except for break. So that's any leadership test. So with that Veteran, you can actually re-roll the leadership test for the Horn of Gondor. No, the Horn of Fredemund. So that means that you've actually got a big boost to negating any flyers on the opposing army. So although your army will sort of mess with itself having impetuous, it will also not be messed with as much by your opposing flyers. So all gyrocopters can just do one, as well as any, say, like dragons being massively reduced in actually their effect. The Earn Your Spurs special rule is enemy standard captured by a unit of Knights Errant is worth 100 victory points as a trophy of war. In addition, while within 6 inches of a model with the Grail Vow or any Lord of Bretonnia, so that's Duke, Baron, or Paladin, can re-roll any natural rolls of 1 to hit. And that is an incredibly good special rule, right? It means that against weapon skill 4 opponents, or even weapon skill 3 opponents, a third of your misses will be re-rolled and turned into hits. So a sixth of your misses will be turned into hits. So very, very good. Now, overall, as an army, the theme of it, incredible, right? I am not personally the biggest fan of this style of army in that it's adding basically semi-frenzy to all of your army. You do get a lot of benefits to mitigate that, like Crusader's Zeal, although arguably that ties into your charge range being even longer and popping Impetuous more. The Crusader's Vow is very useful for re-rolling the panic checks and leadership checks that you might have to take. Just remember that it's not breaks. And Earn Your Spears, when you absolutely plough units of Knights Errant into your opponent's block, you'll get additional victory points for winning. So a very fun army, a different sort of setup to how the army is going to operate with Errants taking the lead. I do think you want Paladins for basically every unit. I wouldn't rely on having a Paladin elsewhere or a character elsewhere to gain the Earn Your Spurs special rules reroll. I wouldn't count on it just being nearby. I'd say if you're having a lance, have it big in this army and have a Paladin. Even if it's a Paladin just with a lance, have it at the front of that. Definitely. Then Dukes, I would say put on a Hippogriff because it's going to be your only access to something that isn't going to charge off at random points when you don't want it to. It's also going to extend then your general's leadership bubble to 18-inch range. So onto the magic items that are available specifically for the Errantry list. We get the Crusader's Lance, which is +2 strength, -2 AP, Armor Bane 2, Furious Charge, so +1 strength on the charge, Hatred All Enemies, which is absolutely excellent, right? And the Crusader's Lance may only be taken by Errantry to Crusade, and may only be used in a turn in which you charged, and then you switch to your hand weapon. Just standard for a lance, right? Now this is very good because it's, or I think it is, because it applies that hatred all the time versus the virtue of the challenge, which only does it in the challenge. You don't want your character, or in this case it'd be a Duke or a Baron to get this level of lance. You don't want that character stuck in a challenge. It also adds that Furious Charge, so you're getting 6 attacks on the charge with the Duke. Really, really good. Next, you get the Crusader's Tapestry for 40 points. Now, this is one to be used like sort of warily because it gives you the Frenzy special rule. Now, you're already charging half the time with the Impetuous special rule, so it's not as much of a downside as you would think because gaining Frenzy is obviously a massive buff to the unit. So you're not actually losing control all the time. You're losing control 50% more of the time. All the time. So it's not that much of a downside, but you'll just have to plan around it with how you move your unit, with how you might you might have to do the things like blocking your own unit with, say, a unit of yeomen, so that that unit can't make a charge, so doesn't have to declare it in a certain turn. So yeah, I'd just be very wary with putting that banner on, but then again, if you're using this army, you're already going to be conscious of that. So having that unit of yeomen that I said might be much more useful. Next, you get... So next we have the Crusader's Clarion, that's 25 points, which is basically taken by a model in the Errantry Crusade army, and on a turn in which you charge, your character's mount and all mounts in the unit have +1 strength. That is actually incredibly good, especially if you say put it on a unit of Pegasus Knights, which all have 2 attacks each. You could then go into strength 5. So if you have 6 Pegasus Knights, being strength 5 with 10 attacks, adding to your knights is 10 attacks at strength 5 with lances. Yeah, I was. Do you know what? I was thinking to myself, why have they got 10 attacks? It's because of the Furious Charge rule that knights have. I think it can make a unit much more devastating for 25 points, whilst also being in that compressed footprint that you might want your unit to have. So, finally, we get the Diadem of Power. The Diadem of Power may be taken by a model in an Errantry Crusade army of infantry. When attempting to cast a Vortex, Magical Missile, or Assailment, you get +1 to your casting roll. Now, 35 points, this only becomes worth it when we're talking about, say, I would think, a Prophetess level that is at level 4 already, so then it gets level 5 from this Diadem of Power. So it's situationally good. Obviously, the Burning Gaze, as from the Lore of the Lady, is a magic missile, so you get +1 to cast that, so you only need to roll a 5 to cast the Burning Gaze. So it's good situationally. However, I think it's a lot of points when you can compare that to magic items in the main rulebook, or not the main rulebook, the Bretonnians section of the Forces of Fantasy that give you, say, +2 to dispel all the time. I think it's just maybe... I think it's situationally useful, but when compared to, say, this is the Diadem of Power, the prayer icon of Quinel's for 25 points, which increases your dispel range, I would look much more into that prayer icon, unless I was really doubling down with my magic items on my Prophetess, which I don't tend to do personally. So next we'll go into the Army of Infamy for the Outcasts. So the Bretonnian Exiles have 0 to 1 Baron per 1,000 points, 0 to 1 Damsel, and then Paladins, Outcast Wizards, and Sergeants at Arms. So this, for a force composition, means that you're missing out on a Duke. I suppose it's fair, there's only 12 of them or something in Bretonnia, and you've been outcast as the Baron, so not that one, right? 0 to 1 Damsel, because someone's sticking around, so you're not going to get a level 4 wizard in the list, because the Outcast Wizard that replaces the Prophetess, it can only go up to level 3. Core, you're going to have 1+ Knights of the Realm on foot or Mounted Knights of the Realm as normal. 1+ unit of Yeoman Guard or Peasant Bowmen, and Yeoman Guard are a new unit in this section. You've got 0 to 1 Knights Errant per 1,000 points, which obviously is just like a normal sort of drawback. And Men at Arms and Mounted Yeoman also in core, so that moves your Mounted Yeoman from special, I believe, into core. Special is made up of Squires and Pegasus Knights, a 0 to 1 unit of Battle Pilgrims per 1,000 points. Hopefully everyone has heard my thoughts on Battle Pilgrims enough that it's a cool unit, but I don't think it's a really good unit, so I'm not too upset it's -1, especially when really I think one of the strengths of this army is the Exile's Vow, so you're not going to be taking the Grail Vow enough to really make it worthwhile and actually get the Unbreakable rule that you want from the Battle Pilgrims. Rare is 33% of your army, so slightly more than normal, made up of Questing Knights, Border Prince's Brigands, a new unit, 0 to 1 Field Trebuchet per 1,000, and a Bombard per 1,000. So that's 2 separate 0 to 1s. So in a 2,000 points list, if you really wanted to, you could be taking 4 pieces of artillery, 2 of each. Now, there is some larger downsides in this list compared to the normal Bretonnian list. It's one that I've run quite a few times now. So I have been staring at this list intently. The 0 to 1 Baron per 1,000, but no Duke sort of feels like a big downside. However, what I've tended to do is make up for it with the magic items that are available to you. So as we're looking at this, I wouldn't just immediately turn off from this list just because there's no Duke or Grail Knights. I do think there are things that really make up for it, that replace all the stuff that is lost. So the special rules that we go through are the Banished Lords. Essentially, Barons, Paladins within a Bretonnian Exiles army cannot take the Grail Vow. So that means no access to the Grail Vow across the army, right? Battle Pilgrims then can't become unbreakable. However, the following characters may replace Knight's Vow with the Exile's Vow for free. All of you Knights. Easiest way to say that. What does the Exile's Vow do? Well, the Exile's Vow actually gives you Stubborn and Veteran. So, Veteran means that you reroll in all leadership chests. We've already talked about that in the Crusading, the Errantry Crusade Exiles list. It does mean that the Horn of Friedemund, you get a reroll to the leadership test on that, which I think is excellent, and also excellent for other things, but it's something that I think is worth mentioning because that interplay isn't immediately obvious. Stubborn is obviously very good in that you fall back in good order the first time you need to take a leadership test after combat, or you can choose to do that. Now that is something that I think is situationally beneficial. It's not the best thing ever, because actually I want to find ways to give ground, and sometimes I'm not beaten that much. I just want to roll for it to see if I can just give ground. So it's situationally useful, especially in an army of knights. So that's really going to matter how you set up your knight units. Now included or excluded from that is that you can't join units of peasants. So it means that your Baron Paladins can join units of peasants and give them bonuses like just as normal characters, which I think is really, really good. Reclaimed Glory. The Bretonnian Exiles army cannot pray. Instead, you gain the lady's benefit by winning a challenge, by running down a fleeing unit, not just breaking a unit, but actually running it down, or by running down a unit during a charge move. Now, this change is massive for the army. It means that all of your expensive knights, your knights on foot, aren't getting their wards to start off with. You actually need to proactively have done something and picked off a weak unit to get that benefit. And that can be really hard for some units. So Knights of the Realm on foot, I have struggled to get that benefit on them. It's where the Damsel's Regeneration spell really helps out by actually getting them some like actually getting them that basically their praying bonus back, but then you're actually casting the spell to do that. Pegasus Knights I've found don't suffer too much from it because you're so fast you can just pick on a weak unit and immediately get it back. However, it means that in the first turn where you may not be charging something, you're not going to have it, and that's where cannon shooting and bolt throwers can really mess up your day. The flip side of that is that you're not always going to go second, which is the downside of praying. So it's this sort of toss-up. I'd say it's worse for you the slower your knights are. So Knights of the Realm on foot have a much worse time not having the knight or the Blessing of the Lady than Pegasus Knights, and then a small units of Knights of the Realm that you might want to be taking on a flanking unit. It's not as bad for you because that's not going to be a priority target for your enemy. What it's really going to matter on is a large unit of knights that will just be hammered by bolt throwers, or Knights of the Realm on foot that it's going to be like turn 3 or 4 by the time they've properly got that bonus now. To actually sort of not half mitigate it, but To interplay with this, I definitely recommend taking the Gauntlet of the Challenge. It's a common magic item for Bretonnians. It means that your enemy can't refuse challenges. It's 5 points, so that means any unit champion that can take magic items can take it. So you charge in, and now they can't refuse your challenge. And it just lets you actually get this bonus faster and more reliably. And I think it's definitely needed as an interplay when playing the Bretonnian Exiles. So next we'll go into the magic items that are available to the Bretonnian Exiles list. First up, we've got for 30 points the Frontier Axe. Basically, this is a strength +2, AP -3, magical attacks, multiple wounds 2, two-handed strike at initiative. And for 30 points, this on a Baron is absolutely excellent. It's actually what gave me the idea to do my Bretonnians as sort of a late Saxon theme so that they could be like Huscarls with frontier axes. But it's a really good item. And the multiple wounds 2 really makes up for your Baron not being Duke level. So it might seem a bit... I actually think it's a bit low in points cost. But when you think your Baron actually doesn't have that high of a points cap, this is really useful. What I've been pairing that with is the Virtue of Purity, which means my Baron will always get the 5-up ward, regardless of whether your army's prayed or his unit's won. So he will get the 5-up ward. Now, next up, we're going to get to the Iron Spike Shield. So 20 points, maybe taken by a model with Army of Infamy. It's a shield. However, when your opponent rolls a natural 1 to hit or to wound the wielder of the Iron Spike Shield, they immediately suffer a Strength 3 AP -1 hit. Now that being on both on the to hit and to wound really increases the likelihood of that going off. If you aren't going to take the Horn of Fridimund, the fuck off Flyer's Horn, if you're not going to take that, it means you have enough points to be able to take something like this, because the Horn is 40 points, your Paladin's got 50 points to play with, so you could take this Iron Spike Shield, and then any time anyone does anything to your Battle Standard Bearer, they've got a likelihood of actually doing damage to themselves. It's quite a nice little tricky item. Next, we've got the Lucky Heirloom. This is 25 points, so you can also put this on your Baron at the same time as the Frontier Axe, or obviously anyone else with 25 points left. They can re-roll a single failed hit, wound, armor save, or ward save once a turn. And turns are now player turns. Like, the whole game round is a game round. So, like, game turn is a round now. So you can do this in yours and your opponent's turn. And it's really useful for if you, like, oh god, I've got 4 attacks. Bam, oh no, I've hit with 3. I really need to get through their ward. I get a 4. Or do I need to explain how... I don't think I need to explain how rerolls work. They're really good, and for 25 points, being able to use it in any situation, basically 12 times across the game if you don't die, it's excellent. Next we go on to the Banner of the Zealous Knight for 25 points. And oh my god, this is a good one. For 25 points, which is the normal level of points cap for a Bretonnian Knights of the Realm unit, you can take a Vanguard move, and what is really nasty is Vanguard doesn't stop you from charging. So what you can actually do is take this on a mega unit of knights, charge first turn, and get your bonus of praying, as well as having the stubborn and veteran straight away. So it's something that I'd really look into, having it on a unit. In fact, I'm going to look up now while we're on the cast, because I want to know whether you can have it on a unit of Knights of the Realm on foot, because that would really, really mitigate. Yeah, they can. So this can actually be put on a Knights of the Realm on foot, and that will really mitigate any of the downsides of those knight units. So it's definitely one to have in there. And that's one of the things of this Exile army. You've got lots of downsides to the army, but also it's made up for in these random magical items and units that you can get across the list. Next, we've got in the enchanted items, the Worm Breath Vial. So this, for 20 points, is a one-use, basically strength 4 AP -1 breath weapon with flaming and magical attacks. What that will allow you to do is, from a Pegasus, if you're war machine hunting as a lone character, flame off the side into an enemy unit on your way past to go and destroy a war machine or light cav unit. Really useful. Like, I definitely use it on things that are faster moving than slower moving though. Like the Pegasus, maybe something, a lone character on a warhorse or hippogriff. And for 20 points, it's just a nice little thing to throw in to make yourself useful the turn before you charge, even weaken up the unit that you're about to charge. Finally, we've got the Flame Strike Wand. And what that does, for 15 points, you may cast Fireball from the Lore of Battle Magic as a bound level of 3. It's nice. It's not the one that I immediately go to, but for 15 points, you can just throw it in there and get an additional spell, essentially, and be power level 3, so it allows a damsel to be 1 higher power level than she normally would be, despite the fact that you've only paid the damsel points cost at level 2 for it. So with that, let's get into the actual special units that the Outcast army has. So the Outcast Wizard is the first one we come across, and at 45 points for a level 1, it's very cheap for what it is. It knows spells they know spell from a vast array of magic laws, like battle magic. Demonology is very good to get in there. I personally really like Demonology as a lore. Some of the buffs and hexes that they have are really good, as well as the base level magic missile. The summoning is very good. You've got dark magic, elementalism, illusion, and necromancy. Necromancy is a very good spell lore. The evil ones are the ones that pop out to me, aren't they? But so it'd be mounted on a warhorse for that extra speed. Is tailor as needed, I suppose. And you may be a level 2 or 3 wizard for 30 or 60 points, which is slightly cheaper than normal. You've got magical attacks, magic resistance 1, an untutored arcanist. So if you're an untutored arcanist, if you roll on the miscast table, you roll an extra d6, so 3d6, and discard the highest. For the amount of times that miscasts actually come off, I would say the discounting points for Outcast Wizards and the extra laws of magic that's available, and even modelling opportunities of this, are definitely worth it. It's a really enjoyable sort of feel to have this random Outcast Wizard that's just a sellsword. I imagine all the Bretonnians hate them, right? Because it's not a damsel who's using magic. But it's a nice little addition to the list. It can get some extra things in there. And yeah, it's a really good unit for its points cost. Next, we've got the Yeoman Guard, and these are the replacements of peasants in the main section, or at least the 1+ section. You can have men-at-arms in addition to this, so you might want a unit of men-at-arms in addition, depending on how you feel you're going to be using these. So you've got basically weapon skill 3 and leadership 6 instead of weapon skill 2 and leadership 5. You're an additional point, and you have hand weapons, light armor, and shields, and you can have either halberds or thrusting spears for free. It is a point to upgrade to polearms, so then you'd be 6 points, so 150% the points cost of a men-at-arms. You can take a magic standard worth 25 points, so you can have a unit of 50 of these with a vanguard move if you really wanted. And you can also take the Blessed Triptych for 25 points, which makes you stubborn. You have Close Order, Horde, Peasantry, Shield Wall, Veteran, and Warband. So you're re-rolling leadership tests except for breaks. You've got the Shield Wall and Warband like normal men-at-arms. What you don't have is levies. So you can use your General's Leadership and you can use your BSB's re-roll. So it makes them a really solid block that your opponent is just going to have to shift, because you're going to be Leadership 10 with a Sergeant of Arms in there. You can put your Baron in there if you want, because the Outcast Vow doesn't stop you from joining. You can have a BSB in there. And I think it's a really, really powerful unit. and only 1 point more base than a men-at-arms unit. Now, on the flip side of that, I have found myself sometimes being like, well, if I had the pole arms, I could be using them as halberds when I want, spears when I want. And the weapon skill 2 doesn't matter to me that much. Against a unit with weapon skill 5, that's a very elite unit that when they're going into a unit of yeoman guard, that when I've got, say, like what I've been running 50 of them, is it actually worth it to have that weapon skill 3? And I don't know. And I think it's situationally dependent, and a cheaper unit of peasants may be worthwhile over a yeoman guard unit. So you may use 25 yeoman guard rather than a massive unit. But it's something I've been trying out both ways. I think there's merits to either, especially because the yeoman guard don't have levies. But it's something that for every benefit from one side, I've flipped and thought of a negative on the other. So I don't think there's a wrong choice. I think these are just a different choice. And definitely if you want to put characters in the unit, or even have a battle standard in general nearby, these are the way to go. If you want, say, a big unit of peasants securing the flank, nowhere near your battle standard or your general, I do think the men-at-arms are probably the way to go. And do you know what? That might change tomorrow, but those are my current thoughts on them, having used them in sort of multiple games now. Next, we've got the Border Prince Brigands. These are 4 points a model, so back to the cost of peasants. They've got weapon skill 3, ballistic skill 3. They are regular infantry, and they're not close order, they're open order. So you can do a bit more messing about on the moves by turning that 90 degrees with them at the end of their move. They can take one of the following, and they've got motley crew, so this can be mixed. Additional hand weapons or shields. Any model may take a pistol, a blunderbuss or crossbow. And that gives you access to that strength 4 within your shooting, rather than the warbows is strength 3. Or sorry, the longbows is strength 3. So it's a nice little unit to have in there, even just for that reason being so cheap, because you're only 7 points a model when you take a crossbow. You have warband, so if you're a ranked up unit, you can be up to leadership 10, because the Desperado is base leadership 7. They have got levies, however, so they're not using the BSB or general, but that's not such a downside. The main way that I see these as being interesting to use, though, is that they can take ambushers or scouts, which I think scouts, really, I do prefer scouts, but either I've just not had as much experience as some using ambushers, so I feel more comfortable using that scouts, right? Whereas, say, if you play Beastmen a lot and are really nailed down with ambushers, you might want that. Taking a unit of them with blunderbusses, which is D3 shots with volley fire, so you can have multiple ranks, getting half the shots from the ones behind. I think it's like an interesting way to use them. It's strength 3, AP -1, and the multiple shots D3, and you don't take negative modifiers for using multiple shots or making stand and shoots. So even if you're at the long range of 6 to 12, it means that you'll be hitting on 5s. And then if you've moved, obviously it'll be 6s, but with multiple shots D3, I think it's at least a fun unit to use and doesn't have to be too expensive if it turns out to be rubbish. And the AP -1 all the time, I mean, it's like you've rolled a 6 on the Armorbane 1 for the longbow peasants. So it's something that I'll be converting up as soon as I can. And a nice little nasty thing is that you can put a 50-point magic item on the Desperado. So if you've got scouts, what you can do is actually get up into a position with this unit that no one's expecting anything from, and then move up and flame breath with the worm breath vial in the magic item section from that Desperado. And it can be a little unit that for 40 points, 55, including the magic item, no one's expecting anything from, and then you just surprise someone with. Finally, we'll get onto the Border Prince's Bombard. So for 100 points, it's toughness 7, 3 wounds, so it's it's not getting just killed by bolt throwers in one shot, which is, I think, an important distinction now. You've got basically 48-inch range, strength 8, AP -3, so it's more than a cannon. It's same as a great cannon, I believe. Armor Bane 2, so maximum AP of -5. Cannon, move or shoot, multiple wounds D3 +1. And you've got a bit harsher misfire table, but really I think what's attractive about this to a Bretonnian player is that because it's got the cannon fire special rule, you can bounce through units. So if I've got a big unit on a hill, if I go first, during deployment, I put my cannons on a hill, and I'm going to put a unit in front of them, like my big block of yeoman guard. If I go first, I move the yeoman off and shoot my cannons, and I can bounce through any units on their hill and hit their cannons or bolt throwers. Now, if I go second, if they've got bolt throwers, I've got a yeoman unit in front of my cannons that are on a hill, so they can't shoot at my cannons because they're blocked by another unit on the hill. So you sort of get one up in an artillery duel by having a cannon type artillery piece, and that's something that's previously off limits to Bretonnians outside of mercenaries. Yeah, and I think it's a really good unit for just nailing stuff. It really helps you get one up in the artillery duel that usually really frustrate your knights. And as I was saying before, it can be something that really is a killer of your Knights of the Realm on foot or big units of knights. And this is a way to mitigate it, is by having Border Prince's bombards in there. And there's also a really good model for the Cities of Sigmar range where you can just take off the front cowling of it and just have a very antiquated looking bombard that's ready to go for your Border Prince's army. And that sort of brings us to the conclusion of the Bretonnian addendum. Hopefully you enjoyed this additional content. If you did, don't forget to do the YouTubey things like, comment, and subscribe. It does let me know that you want more content like this. Maybe you want the content broken down into these addendums so it's more like manageable chunks and you don't have to listen to like a 3-hour cast. Let us know in the comments what you actually prefer in that way so I can prioritize doing it in that way in the future. If you really liked it or you want pre-release videos, they are all on the Patreon, where currently you can get Ogres versus Warriors of Chaos on pre-release for the Old World, as well as next week's The Old World Guide, an Imperial Fist Teleport Attack versus Iron Warriors Armoured Company in a Heresy game on pre-release, as well as a Necromunda Slave Ogrin versus Goliath Brawl in our Necromunda campaign, all on pre-release. And with that, I'll catch you next time in a bit.